So I have to turn the thing on. Yes. So good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for very kind introduction of me, Matt. So today, on behalf of METI, Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, the Japanese government, I'd like to share with you the METI's perspectives on the Digital Silk Road Initiative by China. I'd like to explore the potential US-Japan collaboration on the digital aspect of Indo-Pacific strategy too. So in this sense, please look at this slide. Actually, this is an excerpt from the US-China Economic and National Security Review Commission 2018 annual report. We can categorize projects under the Chinese Digital Silk Road Initiative into three. Number one, telecommunication infrastructure. Two, e-commerce offering. And number three, smart city projects. And then today, assuming that hardware stuff basically categorized into the first one will be addressed by John's presentation and then following panel. So in this sense, I'd like to focus on the second and the third pillars of the initiative and stress the necessity and urgency of public-private partnership among US and Japan, given the technological leapfrogging situation in the emerging economies in Asia. Jerry Yang, co-founder of Yahoo, said in a recent interview, quote, Southeast Asia, enjoying high-speed growth, resembles China 10 to 15 years ago. So-called digital leapfrogging, such as wide use of mobile phones or smartphones without the period of landline use, develops more rapidly in Southeast Asia than in China. End of the quote. We have already seen that various types of digital leapfrogging in this region, such as e-commerce, ride-hailing, e-payment, these leapfrogging have dramatically changed ASEAN or Indian economies and societies. Look at this slide. People in the emerging economies of Asia are much more smartphone addicted than Americans and Japanese. Last year, the Indian smartphone sales surpassed the US one, and Indian market becomes the second largest market in the world. Besides, the population in these emerging economies have considerable optimism that new technologies offer more opportunities than risks. And more importantly, relatively undeveloped infrastructure and then social systems have accelerated various efforts of problem solving by digital technologies. For example, more than half population of Southeast Asia do not have bank account, and the public trust in the currency is not high. Due to these circumstances, e-payment service via smartphones have spread through the Southeast Asia rapidly. In Thailand, 44 million people, around 60% of total population, have registered to Prompt Pay. This is an e-payment service promoted by the Thai Central Bank. Another instance of social problem is a traffic congestion. You might have experienced difficulties in grabbing a taxi in Southeast Asia. Ride-hailing service companies, such as Grab in Singapore or Gojek in Indonesia, have provided solutions to such circumstances. Grab, established in 2012, has increased its number of registered drivers from 100,000 in 2014 to 2.6 million drivers in 2018. That is 26 times as much. And in March 2018, Grab purchased Uber's Southeast Asian businesses. Now, Grab is expanding its business domain to a wide range of consumer and wholesale distribution and delivery services. Gojek in Indonesia has provided bike ride-sharing services in Indonesia, where you experience a terrible traffic congestion. Now Gojek provides food delivery services, shopping agent services, and even cash accommodation services by bike drivers for consumers. Google invested in Gojek last year. As such, Asia is full of attractive and energetic entrepreneurs with a belief that she or he can make the world a better place. We saw a rise of startups or sharing businesses in 2016 in China, and now we can see the same kind of boom in ASEAN and India. Those entrepreneurs have seized business opportunities by finding challenges that society or corporations face and resolve the challenges with full use of digital technologies. In other words, Asia is hungry for technology and facing with middle-income trap. Even the governments in this region strongly advocating digital innovation as one of the pillars of their growth strategy. Now, many of my ASEAN friends admire China for its technologies, not the United States and Japan, nor Japan. This reminded me of an anecdote of Chinese culinary students in Tokyo. Recently, we have a lot of Chinese students who are, come and learn the Japanese food cooking in Tokyo. Almost all of them, even after all days of China, because almost all Japanese still use paper currency and coins, and our menus of restaurants still written in paper and then unchanged frequently. So look at the Chinese big IT platformers' activities. They take these rapid leapfrogging changes in Asia as new business opportunities and seize them ahead of us. While Chinese government promotes Digital Silk Road Initiative, Chinese private companies have taken the lead in materializing concrete projects. In addition to building telecommunications infrastructure, Chinese tech giants have accelerated their efforts of expanding e-commerce offerings and supplying smart city projects. From leading Chinese companies, for the leading Chinese companies in digital space, such situation in emerging economies of Asia is just like what China had experienced before, and thus they must be quite confident that those economies will eventually successfully develop digital economy like China. Thus, Jack Ma, the founder of Alibaba, recently told, quote, "We think that e-commerce and the internet are a great opportunity in Asia, and we go to places with countries with young people, countries that have a lot of small and mid-sized companies, because big companies, they don't need us," end of the quote. In fact, in last year, Alibaba provided the city of Kuala Lumpur with its City Brain service for the smartization of Kuala Lumpur City. City Brain service uses big data and AI on Alibaba's cloud computing infrastructure, which is adapted by the city of Hangzhou, the hometown of Alibaba City in China. This is the first case of these services being provided for a foreign country. And then IT platform businesses in Asia have grown rapidly, and then Chinese IT platformers invest in various types of IT platform businesses in this region. In ASEAN, there are 7 unicorns, such as Grab or Gojek, and they are competing each other. All of the 7 unicorns are injected equity by Chinese tech giants, such as Alibaba, Tencent, and Didi. In India, there are also 12 unicorns, such as Flipkart, which Walmart acquired last May. 7 out of 12 unicorns have received Chinese tech giants' equity investment. Alibaba and Tencent provide various services covering various consumer life domains. These have given them outstanding opportunities and capabilities of collecting a wide range of data. Funding power of Chinese entity is not the only strength of them any longer. The US and Japan must face up to this reality. And we also have to note that the leapfrogging technologies in Asian emerging economies are not just copycat of US or Chinese e-commerce businesses. Those technologies have developed in a manner which we have not even thought of under different environment and different social settings. Indian company, Oil Rooms, established as a bargain hotel chain in 2013, has grown up to be one of the biggest hotel chains with 450,000 rooms in total. Given the price sensitivity of the market, Indian market, the company hires more than 700 AI engineers and then changes its room charges 4,300 times a day. Taking advantage of that system, the company has fostered in the Indian market. The company plans to expand its businesses to China, UK, as well as Japan. And I also would like to draw your attention to the fact that Grab and Gojek are now trying to play a key role in realizing inclusive growth or endogenous growth in their countries. For example, Gojek's business model itself facilitates income redistribution from its customers, higher income layer, to drivers and small merchants, the lower income layer. Grab launched an accelerator which provides capital for startups' business expansion and lets them use Grab's platforms for doing businesses. So we have seen strong wants and wills in emerging economies in Asia. METI believes that for the United States, in Japan, providing funds, technologies, and market for such problem-solving businesses in Asia might be a new regional strategy as a part of Indo-Pacific strategy. Recently, you can see some Japanese companies which noticed such dynamism of digital businesses in Asia, found business opportunities there. For example, last year, Toyota invested in Grab, and Aeon one of the biggest distributors in Japan, launched a business collaboration with Gojek by linking its shopping malls and Gojek's delivery services. And even successful IT platformers in Asian emerging economies, such as Grab and Gojek, are advancing to a different stage where they need to introduce deep technologies of AI or IoT. We heard from one of the executives of those companies, quote, "We'd like to avoid giving a handle of our nervous system, that is AI, to a big Asian nation. We feel scared of being taken data of our businesses by the nation," end of quote. So there are real needs in the emerging Asia for active participation of US and Japanese companies in digital transformation and their collaboration with local IT platformers. Such contribution to the regional growth is essential for building a free and open data distribution space in this region with about 600 million population in ASEAN and the 1.3 billion population of India. Otherwise, a harmful digital protectionism, such as data localization, could spread around the region. Then actually, Prime Minister Abe launched the concept of data free flow with trust at the World Economic Forum in Davos. We believe that US and Japan should work together in expanding our investment in Asian problem-solving digital businesses and facilitating free and open innovation in order to materialize this concept of data free flow with trust. So what the government could do in this area? As you've already known, the US and Japan agreed to cooperate on the digital aspect of Indo-Pacific strategy, in addition to the infrastructure and energy aspects. As to the digital aspect, of course, the security of next-generation telecommunications infrastructure, such as 5G networks or submarine cables, is one of the very important agenda of US-Japan cooperation. But at the same time, US-Japan joint engagement in the problem-solving digital businesses in the emerging Asia is also essential. So needless to say, the private companies should play leading roles in these efforts, but simultaneously, governments should play effective roles in providing a sound environment where private companies can enjoy free and open innovation. The rapid expansion of the fourth industrial revolution has also rapidly increased speed of business cycle, size of businesses, and risks associated with them. Thus, we have to recognize the necessity of securing risk money for supporting rapid digital innovation in Asia, while avoiding harmful crowding out. In the United States, the BUILD Act will strengthen the risk money provision function for its private sector. In Japan, JBIC, Japan Bank for International Cooperation, has strengthened its equity financing function and contributed to accelerating digital innovation in Asia. US and Japan should pursue a further strengthening and effective coordination of such policy-based financing. Besides that, we have to undertake an international rulemaking regarding trade, e-commerce, investment, technology protection, privacy, infrastructure development, which can accommodate rapidly changing business environment caused by digitalization and globalization. The concept of data-free flow with trust is one of the important pillars of this international rulemaking. At the same time, US and Japan can work together in capacity building efforts in the emerging Asia for proper implementation of those international rules. In conclusion, again, we are very much confident of the effectiveness of the US-Japan Indo-Pacific strategic cooperation in the areas of energy and infrastructure. Now, we have to expand such effective collaboration into the area of digital innovation in Asia. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. I'm John Hillman, director of the Reconnecting Asia project, which is what we keep advertising here, and I'd encourage you to check it out if you haven't already. For almost 4 years now, we've been mapping infrastructure across the Eurasian supercontinent, tracking not only China's Belt and Road, but also many of the other connectivity initiatives that are underway. And you can view a lot of the projects that we're tracking on our website, where we also have news and analysis. One of our recent reports was being handed out earlier. Hopefully you got a copy. And if not, it's on the website. It's called Influence and Infrastructure. And it basically tries to lay out the ways in which states use infrastructure projects to advance strategic objectives. And while the report is intended to help serve as a guide for making sense of current developments, it draws from examples throughout history. And so what I'd like to do briefly this morning is share one of those examples with you. But let me start first by underscoring what's relatively new, and that's China's rise as a leading provider of infrastructure beyond its borders. So let's just for a minute consider one type of telecommunications infrastructure, which are submarine fiber optic cables. I feel like that doesn't get a lot of attention right now. We're all concentrated on wireless networks, but these are incredibly important. They carry the vast majority of international data. And a decade ago, Chinese companies were involved with just a handful of these cables. And those projects were almost exclusively in China, Taiwan, or Hong Kong. And as you can see now, China's share is growing quite dramatically. It's a landing point. China's a landing point owner or supplier for 11.4% of these cables globally, and more than twice that, 24% of planned cables. The share is, as you might expect, even higher in Asia. Almost 30% of existing cables and over half of planned cables. One of China's planned cables in Asia is a project maybe some of you have heard of. It has a clever acronym, which I'll let you figure out. And it went into production last October. When completed in 2020, it will become the shortest route for high-speed internet traffic between Asia and Africa. The cable will begin in Gwadar, which, as some of you know, is a key part of the China-Pakistan economic corridor, which is a flagship, probably the flagship corridor of China's Belt and Road. And what's striking about this project, among other things, is how this cable and several others like it are literally retracing the steps of great powers that came before China. So a century and a half ago, Britain was wrapping the world with telegraph cables, including one through Gwadar on its way to India, which was Britain's prized colonial possession at the time. And while every historical comparison has its limits, I think this case illustrates how what begins as a commercial contest can quickly become a strategic contest. And I think it's also worth noting that these cables, while a bit slower, they were cutting-edge technology of the day. So in 1865, sending a telegram from Britain to India took 5 to 6 days, and it involved up to 14 relay stations. At each of those relay stations, the message was received, decoded, and then physically transferred to someone else who coded the message and sent it onto the next relay system. And so this was, quite difficult. Sometimes messages are arriving mangled, and it's sort of an international game of telephone before the telephone, and it was quite expensive to play. A 20-word message cost the equivalent of roughly $800 today. These early communication infrastructure types were also plagued by design and operational challenges. In the telegraph's first few decades, there were no international standards, and wires were being produced according to various specifications. Engineers were basically, through trial and error, still figuring out what materials were best for different climates and how to protect wires against common threats, ships' anchors and stormy seas and so on. The first cable to India was laid in 2 sections, and both failed, leaving the British government dependent on a connection that ran through the Ottoman Empire and that was therefore vulnerable to being monitored. And frustrated by that experience, the British government decided to provide limited support for surveying new routes, for negotiating access, and for laying a set of strategic cables. In the meantime, Britain's global share of telegraph cables was expanding rapidly, and that was driven primarily by commercial motives. British firms had laid the very first cables in the 1850s, and their innovative materials and techniques eventually dominated the market, so much so that Britain's largest telegraph company manufactured 2/3 of the cables used in the 19th century and almost half thereafter. And in 1896, Britain owned 24 of the world's 30 cable-laying ships. So this is an illustration of one of the very first cable-laying ships. But Britain owned 24 of 30 of them at the close of the century. Eventually, though, strategic concerns took hold. At the close of the 19th century, the British government began developing a smaller system of cables that touched only Britain and its possessions. And this network of all-red routes was actually largely opposed by some within the British government, the Treasury, but they were essentially outmaneuvered by Britain's defense agencies, which, as the historian Paul Kennedy has written, developed a virtual fetish for these routes. These investments had little commercial value, but they paid off in the coming years as competition among Europe's great powers escalated and finally spiraled out of control. And so for German officials, the guns of August were followed by a deadly silence. On August 5th, 1914, a day after declaring war on Germany, Britain cut 5 of Germany's telegraph cables, which remained disabled for the duration of the war. And so Britain's advantages in that conflict stem not only from owning and operating infrastructure, but also the abilities of its companies and the international standards they set, and in monopolizing much of the expertise to lay and repair cables that ensured that Britain's rivals were unable to do so themselves. So I think the story could end there, and it would be something of a cautionary tale about how commerce can quickly turn into a strategic contest. But I think the real story is a little more complicated, and so there are at least 2 other dimensions that I think are worth pausing on just in conclusion. One of those is that the telegraph was ultimately a double-edged sword for Britain. So it solidified Britain's control over its colonial territories initially, but then eventually these same infrastructure types undermined that control. British cables did not only carry colonial commands, but also potent ideas for change. Especially in India, nationalist movements used these tools in their fight for independence, and Britain's censors were unable to stem the flow of news and communication. The other dimension that I think is worth pausing on is that the source of Britain's commercial success as a global hub for communications was due in large part to its openness. So during the global telegraph race, unlike most countries, Britain granted rights for landing cables on its territory without restrictions. So far from weakening its firms, it was this openness that helped turn London into the global communications and financial hub that it remains today. So collectively, I think these experiences suggest that while communications infrastructure can offer strategic benefits, those benefits indeed come with some unintended consequences, especially for those who try to censor and control information flows. These experiences might also suggest that limited strategic investments could be worthwhile, but that it would be a mistake to allow strategic concerns to fully eclipse economic fundamentals, which often provide the longer-term, more lasting benefits. And so as I mentioned in the beginning, every historical comparison has its limits. This report that we just put out is filled with examples. And I think that as new as many of today's developments are, including with much of the new technology, they're perhaps not entirely unprecedented. So I'd encourage you to visit our site, to check out the report, and to help us make sense of these developments. Let us know what you think. And with that, thank you, and let me welcome our panel onto the stage.